to determine how much of that will be paid by the district attorney's office under a new state law.
On Wednesday, 8 law firms representing President Donald Trump submitted their legal bills to the courts in hopes of recouping more than $6.2 million spent on the election interference case.
This is like every other legal case. It starts off very simply, it ends very simply, but in the middle it gets layered and complicated.
As written, state law allows these attorneys to ask for reimbursement of reasonable costs associated with this case. Attorney Daryl Cohen says it'll be up to Fulton County Judge Scott McAfee to decide what reasonable is.
It depends on the lawyer's age, how long he or she has been practicing, their level of expertise, and what it would likely cost had he or she not represented him, but someone else.
Good evening. Tonight, we are tracking a presidency that has moved beyond the courtroom and into a global theater of conflict. We have obtained internal documents detailing an unprovoked military strike ordered by the president against a sovereign nation. At the same time, a newly released deposition reveals a systematic campaign of retribution inside the Department of Justice. This is not just a policy debate. This is a story about the absolute limits of power. And tonight, we have the receipts. Clip here.
Documents submitted by attorney Steve Sadow show he charged roughly $1.5 million for his work defending the president. He told 11 Alive in early December that he expects the Fulton County District Attorney's Office to pay for that.
It's unfortunate that her budget will be so affected, but she's the one that brought the case, and she's the one that has to live with the outcome.
Sadow expects attorneys for the other defendants to file motions as well that could raise the proposed bill to nearly $10 million.
My guess is that they will settle for significantly less. But does that mean $5 million? Does it mean $2 million? Does it mean 5.8? I don't know. And I don't think any of us know at this point.
Now, Fulton County allocated about $40 million in its budget for the district attorney's office this fiscal year. If that $10 million estimate is accurate, attorneys on this case are asking for nearly one of every $4 funded by the county.
We begin tonight with a development that has sent shockwaves through the halls of Congress and the international community. On January 5th, 2026, the New York City Bar Association took the extraordinary step of condemning what it called blatantly illegal actions by President Donald J. Trump. The president has ordered the use of United States military force in Venezuela. The goal of this mission was to seize Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and take control of the country's vast oil reserves. The administration claims this was a law enforcement action to execute an arrest warrant from 2020. But legal experts and constitutional scholars are calling it something else entirely. They are calling it an unlawful regime change. They point to the fact that the president did not seek a declaration of war from Congress. This action appears to bypass Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. It also appears to violate the War Powers Act of 1973. That law is clear. A president cannot initiate hostilities without prior authorization unless the U.S. is under attack. This is more than a legal technicality. This is a move back toward the gunboat diplomacy of a century ago. The administration's own statement suggests the U.S. intends to run Venezuela until a leader satisfactory to the president is chosen. International law experts argue that drug trafficking charges, no matter how serious, cannot be used as a license for a unilateral war. They note that if drug trafficking justifies an invasion, then so could economic harm or migration flows. This would leave no meaningful legal limit on the use of military force. Congress is now facing a choice. There are calls for a joint resolution to condemn the abduction of Maduro. There are calls to cut off funding for this occupation. And if those fail, members of the Bar Association are suggesting that impeachment may be the only tool left to rein in what they describe as a lawless presidency. This isn't just about foreign policy, it is about a president treating a foreign nation's resources as spoils of war. While this crisis unfolds abroad, we are also getting a clearer look at the war being waged inside our own government. We have reviewed the transcript of a closed-door deposition of former special counsel Jack Smith. It took place on December 17, 2025. For hours, Smith sat before the House Judiciary Committee and answered questions about his investigations into the president. What he described was a climate of fear and a campaign of retribution that has decimated the ranks of our career civil servants. Smith testified that the most powerful person in the world has stated he should be in jail, not because he did something wrong, but because he had the audacity to follow the facts. This isn't just about Jack Smith. Since President Trump took office for his second term, the retaliation has been swift and broad. Career attorneys and FBI agents who worked on the Smith investigations have been fired. Smith told the committee that more than a dozen people were terminated with no justification given other than their work on his case. One story Smith shared was particularly devastating. He spoke about a career agent who had served his country in war zones overseas multiple times. This agent was fired 2 weeks after his wife died. Smith became emotional during the testimony, describing the agent's family as dedicated public servants. He said there was no reason for a person like that to go through such a thing. This is the human cost of what Smith calls the patronage system. It is a system where you cannot work in government unless you have a personal political allegiance to the president. Smith warned that this is a danger to the country. When you fire the career experts who know how to investigate complex crimes, you lose the people who teach the next generation. You lose the culture of nonpartisanship that has guided the Department of Justice for decades. He said it saddens and angers him because the long-term costs to our democracy will be great. The president's own words have served as the roadmap for this retribution. On Truth Social, he has called Jack Smith a deranged lunatic and a psycho. He has stood next to the Attorney General and called Smith a criminal. Smith was asked if he believed these posts were a direction to the DOJ to retaliate against him. His answer was simple: yes. The president even issued an executive order on February 25, 2025, targeting Smith's private lawyers at the firm Covington & Burling. The order sought to suspend their security clearances. It also directed agencies to terminate any contracts with the firm. Smith testified that the purpose of this was to chill people from associating with him. He said he knows the president wants retribution against him. He said he would not be surprised if he is eventually indicted. This leads us to the core of the special counsel's work. Smith's final report on the 2020 election case was released after a long legal battle. It is a 137-page document that alleges the through line of the president's efforts was deceit. Smith wrote that, but for the 2024 election and the president's return to power, his office had sufficient evidence to obtain a conviction at trial. The report details a criminal scheme to overturn the 2020 election results. It wasn't a policy dispute. It was a plan to use knowingly false claims of fraud as a weapon. Smith's team interviewed over 250 individuals and took grand jury testimony from 55 people. What they found was a pattern of a candidate who was told repeatedly that he had lost. His own campaign manager told him his claims about non-citizen voters in Arizona were false. The Speaker of the Arizona House told him there was no evidence of fraud. The governor of Arizona told him the game was in the 9th inning and he was several runs down. Even his own Vice President Mike Pence told him he had seen no evidence of outcome determinative fraud. But Smith found that the facts didn't matter to the president. In a private moment with his family, the president reportedly said, "It doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still have to fight like hell." When Joe Biden appeared on TV in November 2020, the president allegedly turned to a staffer and asked, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?" The report paints a picture of a candidate who decided to allege fraud before the election even happened. He was briefed that he would likely have an early lead that would shrink as mail-in ballots were counted. His response was to suggest he would just declare victory early anyway. The scheme moved from words to actions. The report details the fake elector plan. This involved organizing people in 7 states to sign fraudulent certificates, claiming they were the legitimate electors. Smith found that most of these people were deceived. They were told the certificates would only be used if a court ruled in the president's favor. But that wasn't true. The goal was to use the fake votes on January 6 to create enough confusion to throw the election to the House of Representatives. One elector in Pennsylvania saw the plan for what it was. He called it an attempt to overthrow the government and refused to sign. But in other states, the co-conspirators were successful in getting the fake documents sent to Washington. Then came the pressure on the Department of Justice. Smith found evidence that the president tried to use the power of the federal government to back up his lies. He told the acting attorney general to just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. When the DOJ leaders refused, he tried to replace them with a loyalist, Jeffrey Clark. Smith has testimony from the room where DOJ leaders told the president they would all resign if he went through with it. The president backed down, but Smith found it was because he was afraid of the political optics, not because he had a change of heart. This narrative leads directly to January 6, 2021. Smith's office was prepared to prove that the president willfully caused his supporters to obstruct the certification. He summoned them to D.C. with a tweet promising it would be wild. He knew they were angry. During his speech at the Ellipse, He used the word fight more than 10 times. He told them to march to the Capitol to give allied lawmakers the boldness they needed to take the country back. And he told them one final lie about Mike Pence. He told the crowd that Pence had the authority to change the results. He said this despite knowing that Pence had just told him, in no uncertain terms, that he would not do it. We know what happened next. Thousands of supporters marched to the Capitol and violently attacked law enforcement. Officers were hit with metal bats, flagpoles, and bear spray. At least 140 officers were injured. One officer recalled thinking, "I think I might die today." Back at the White House, the president sat in a dining room and watched the news coverage. He saw the riot. He saw his supporters breaching the building. His advisors rushed in and begged him to issue a calming message. He resisted. He said the people were angry because the election was stolen. At 2:24 p.m., while the Capitol was being overrun, the president issued a tweet. He didn't ask for peace. He attacked Mike Pence again. He said Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. 1 minute later, the Secret Service had to evacuate the vice president to a secure location. When an advisor told the president that Pence had been moved, the president's response was, "So what?" Smith's report notes that the president has since called the people who attacked the Capitol patriots and hostages. He has championed the January 6th Choir, a group of defendants detained because of their dangerousness. Smith's conclusion is that the president was the individual most responsible for what happened that day. The second major part of the Smith investigation focused on the classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. Smith's team found 102 documents with classification markings during a court-authorized search. These were not just any documents. They included national security secrets related to Iran's nuclear program and military plans for Iraq. The indictment includes photos of these boxes. They were stored in a ballroom on a stage. They were stored in a bathroom and a shower. These are areas where hundreds of members and guests had access. Social events like weddings and movie premieres were held there, drawing tens of thousands of guests. Smith found that the president had multiple opportunities to return these documents voluntarily. He didn't. Instead, he allegedly engaged in a scheme to hide them from the government and his own lawyers. The report describes the concealment of boxes. When the president was notified of a grand jury subpoena, his body man, Walt Nauta, allegedly moved 64 boxes from a storage room to the president's residence. Only 30 boxes were ever returned to the storage room before the lawyers came to do their search. There was also a scheme to delete security camera footage. A Trump employee, Carlos de Oliveira, allegedly told an IT director that the boss wanted the server deleted. He asked, "What are we going to do?" The president's response to all of this has been consistent. He calls it weaponization. He says it is a partisan attack. His lawyers argue that he has presidential immunity that covers his actions while in office. This brings us to the recent legal battle in New York. The president was convicted of 34 felonies for falsifying business records related to hush money payments. He is scheduled to be sentenced soon. His lawyers have asked the Supreme Court for an emergency stay. They claim he has president-elect immunity. But a bipartisan group of former officials and scholars filed a brief arguing that no such immunity exists. They point out that applicant is currently a private citizen. The law governing the president's term says it doesn't start until January 20th. They argue that winning an election doesn't elevate an individual above the law for crimes committed before taking office. They also push back on the idea that the New York trial used official acts evidence. They note that paying hush money to an adult film star is not an official presidential duty. Most of the evidence challenged, like tweets about Michael Cohen or conversations with aides about personal habits, is unofficial conduct. They argue that stopping the sentencing would be a manifest injustice. It would violate the principle that no person is above the law. The political fallout from these investigations is reaching a boiling point. In Congress, Representative Sri Thanadar has introduced 7 articles of impeachment against the president, just 3 months into his second term. He alleges obstruction of justice, bribery, and corruption. Representative Al Green has also submitted articles of impeachment. Even Elon Musk, who has been a public ally of the president, called for his impeachment after a public feud erupted between them in June 2025. But inside the Republican Party, the message is different. At a retreat at the Kennedy Center, the president told lawmakers that they must win the 2026 midterms to prevent a future impeachment vote. He told them, "If we don't win, they'll find a reason to impeach me." Democratic strategists are now debating how to handle this in the upcoming elections. Some say they should focus only on the economy and affordability. But others argue that ignoring the threat to the rule of law is a mistake. Polling shows that a majority of voters, 52%, supported impeaching the president just 3 months into his term. Among independent voters, that number was even higher, at 55%. There is a sense that the country is split down the middle. But the numbers suggest that the issue of accountability isn't going away. It is being fueled by a Department of Justice that many believe has been turned into a tool for retribution. We have seen investigations launched against Senator Mark Kelly and Senator Adam Schiff. We have seen the firing of career staff at the Public Integrity Section. We have seen the president pardon individuals who violently attacked police officers on January 6th. One rioter, Daniel Rodriguez, was sentenced to 12 years for using a stun gun on an officer's neck. He was pardoned. Another, who crushed an officer in a metal door frame, was also pardoned. Jack Smith was asked what message this sends to the country. He said the people who defended the Capitol that day are heroes. He said pardoning those who assaulted them is wrong. He warned that we will likely see these individuals commit more crimes in our communities in the years to come. As we look at the total picture, from the invasion of Venezuela to the dismantling of the DOJ, the pattern is clear. It is a presidency that views the law not as a boundary, but as an obstacle. The New York City Bar Association warns that if Congress doesn't act to restrict funds or pass a resolution, they must turn to the power of impeachment. They say the president's actions threaten not only our own democracy, but peace and security around the world. We are in a moment where the very foundations of the American system are being tested. The principle that we are a government of laws and not of men is being challenged by a president who has demonstrated a willingness to use the military, the justice system, and the pardon power to achieve his personal goals. The Jack Smith deposition, the final special counsel reports, and the New York conviction are all parts of a single story. It is a story about what happens when accountability is delayed until it can be dismantled from within. In his final report, Jack Smith quoted Attorney General Edward Levi, who took over the DOJ after Watergate. Levi said that our strength is the faith in the essential decency and even-handedness in the law. He said that faith must be continually renewed, or else it is lost. Tonight, the question is whether that faith can survive a president who treats the law as a partisan weapon and military force as a tool for oil and retribution. The evidence is now in the hands of the public and the Congress. We will continue to track the upcoming House votes on the Thanedar impeachment articles. We will follow the sentencing in New York and the inevitable appeals to the Supreme Court. And we will watch the fallout from the invasion of Venezuela. Because as Jack Smith testified, witness intimidation and the dismantling of the rule of law are the most corrosive things that can happen to a country. If we allow them to become the new norm, the toll on our democracy will be catastrophic. The president's own advisors once warned that his plan would lead to a disastrous situation where the election would be decided in the streets. Today, it seems the decision has moved into the boardrooms of oil companies and the command centers of our military. This is the reality of our current constitutional crisis. The guardrails are gone, the experts have been fired, and the person who was the head of the criminal conspiracy is now the person in charge of the investigation into it, and the story is still being written. But for the first time in 250 years, the ending is no longer certain. We will keep you updated as more documents are released and more testimony is heard. To help simplify this complex situation, imagine our democracy is a house built on a foundation of rules. For a long time, everyone who lived there agreed to follow those rules, even when they lost a debate or an election. But now, the person in charge has decided that those rules no longer apply to them. They have started removing the support beams, the career experts and independent courts, because those beams were getting in the way of what they wanted to do. Without those beams, the house might still look the same from the outside, but it is no longer safe to live in. The question now is whether the neighbors, the Congress, and the voters will step in to repair the foundation before the whole structure comes down. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow.